to do a slide. Will you be able to tell me how many people have joined?
Yeah.
About 5 probably.
Okay.
Where are you at the moment?
So, do you see me?
I can see you.
Perfect. All right. Well, we have a few people starting to join. We'll just kick off the webinar in about 30 seconds. We'll just give everyone a chance just to dial in.
It's quite good because I'm starting with a video, so it gives people a bit of chance to come and join us.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think we're ready to kickstart this. So welcome everyone to our webinar today with Julia Hales. Julia is the author of The Green Consumer Guide, and for those of you who haven't read it yet, I will strongly recommend it. So Julia is here today to talk about plastics. And yeah, I mean, really over to you, Julia. I will help you just put up a presentation. And then if you can start just giving us a brief introduction about yourself. Just before we kick off, just so you're all aware, it will be a 20-minute presentation, and then we will have a 10 minutes Q&A in the end. So if you have any questions during the webinar, you can click on the Q&A box, which will be visible on all of your screens, and then just type in the question there, and then we will absolutely get back to it in the end of the webinar. But yeah, enjoy. So I hope you all see my screen here. All right, over to you, Julia.
Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. I don't know where you're viewing from, but I'm going to start with a short film. Can you move that, Claudia? Claudia's operating the slides, so she's going to make sure she moves on when I'm signaling. Okay, next slide. Well, I think you'll all agree that that's a pretty disgusting video, and it's really shocking. It's an indictment of everybody and everything, really, to have that sort of pollution going on. And I think most people look at it with some shock. But actually, the sort of people's waking up to the perils of plastic in the sea were really sort of set alight by Blue Planet and that series. It really lit the touch paper. And this is an image of a turtle trapped in plastic. But there's also an albatross chick. I don't know, can you see me, Claudia? Yeah, so if I wave my hand like that means next slide on the things. Okay, so yes, one of the other images on Blue Planet, there was an albatross chick and it's fed sort of an awful diet of plastics, and their their parents foraged for food and they regurgitated all this lot of plastic, which is pretty horrid. And on the film, apparently they had one chick that was sort of having real trouble, and eventually it regurgitated a toothbrush. Some of you will have seen that the statistic that it's actually going to be forecast to be more plastics in the sea than fish by 2050. So I think that we really understand why so many people are going completely bonkers about plastic. And it really has led to a sort of public anguish and, you know, cries of bang the bag, bring back glass bottles, all sorts of things. And, you know, all these different campaigns trying to move away from plastics in our society. And some of you will have seen Hugh Fernie Whittingstall have teamed up with Anita, I can't remember her surname, and they're doing a war on plastics, and it's a 3-part documentary. You can still see it on BBC One iPlayer. I've actually only seen the first one, but actually it's slightly frustrating, films like this, and even the and even the sort of public reaction about plastics, because people are really focused on sort of plastic is an evil material. And in fact, in Hugh and Anita's film, they've got this, you can see behind them on the slide, that they've gone into a street in Bristol, and they've segmented each of those squares represent a household, and they've got all the households to bring out all their anything that's a single-use plastic container, and then they've totaled up roughly how many on average they've got in the street and worked out how many in UK households. So great, bringing people's awareness about that, but actually possibly a little bit too simplistic and leading people to thinking that some of the solutions that are alternatives to plastic actually make more environmental sense when they don't. So the first thing I was going to do is just produce 4 solutions that I actually don't think make sense, that you might think do. So the first one, actually that's the 4 solutions. The first one, here we are, is replacing plastic bags with paper bags. Now it just seems like a paper bag is just so much better than a plastic bag, and a lot of companies, I mean, I think Boots have announced that they're now abolishing all plastic bags in their store and replacing them with paper bags. Hola Food, I noticed some while ago, they did, you know, lovely big paper bags. A lot of clothes shops that you go into now have those huge sort of cardboardy bags with a sort of string loop. I mean, they're horrendous. And this is just a straight comparison with a bag like the one you're seeing on screen with a plastic bag that does an equivalent thing. It takes about 4 times more energy to make the paper bag than the plastic bag. Now that's, you know, not that surprising when you start thinking about the fact that paper comes from trees, so you've got to all the issue about growing the forest, chopping down the tree, processing it into paper, transporting it. Transporting it, you then come to another issue. It is 10 times bulkier. Now that means there are 10 times more lorries to carry the same number of paper bags as plastic bags, and they're 6 times heavier. So if you think about it in climate change terms, that is not such a brilliant thing. They also don't last as long, which in some cases might be quite good, depending on what you do with it. But it's not particularly good if you can't reuse it and as many times. So for example, with a plastic bag, hopefully people will reuse it several times. Much more difficult to do with a paper bag, particularly if it gets wet, but it just falls apart. So, you know, that's not so good. Then you think, okay, well, maybe it's better when you throw it away because it biodegrades. So I'm going to come to biodegrading now. Next slide. So this is actually looking at plastic cups, but the issue with biodegradable products of all sorts is you have to think about what is actually going to happen to, you know, the cup, the bag, whatever it happens to be, to see whether you're actually making use of the biodegradability. Now, clearly, if a paper bag was floating around in the sea, it would be a lot better than having a plastic bag floating around in the sea. But you can't design our waste to be thrown in the sea because we don't want our waste ending up in the sea. So we have to think of what is actually happening to it, and certainly not encouraging it to be either litter or in the sea in one way or the other. So if you take compostable, biodegradable, whatever it is, and you put it in your home compost. Now with these compostable cups, like the one you're seeing here, if you put it in your home compost, it's actually very, very unlikely to compost at the rate of anything else that is in your home compost. So you will probably end up fishing it out and finding that it hasn't actually biodegraded at all. If you put it in an industrial compost where the council collect it, It could biodegrade because they heat it up to much greater temperatures, and it works for many more things. However, the council, before they do all the composting, they fish out all the plastic, and they don't discriminate between the biodegradable stuff and the non-biodegradable stuff. It's rather difficult when you've got the machines that are just set to fish out the plastic. So you're not actually benefiting from the biodegradability anyway. If you put your plastic cup into a recycling container for recyclable plastic, what it actually does is it contaminates all the other recycling in that batch, so that none of it can be recycled. So it's actually a real negative if it goes into a recycling container. And people often think it's green, put it in recycling, because those two things are synonymous. So that's not all that brilliant either. And then obviously, you know, if you throw it in the sea, actually, funny enough, if you throw it in the sea, it probably won't biodegrade either, because the sea is too cold to get the degradable thing. So really, biodegradability is not the bee's knees. And here we are, next slide. So the next one, which people find, I always get a lot of comeback about this, but I had a milkman come to my door with his milk lorry, and he said, you know, would you like a milk delivery? I said, I definitely do not want a milk delivery on environmental grounds. I think it's a really bad idea. And so he looked rather surprised, because obviously lots and lots of people are embracing the milkman. Hopefully not literally, but they're embracing the milkman because they think it is much more eco. However, if you just imagine if all our grocery items were packaged in really heavy glass bottles that were quite breakable, and then they were each individually delivered in a little truck that came to your house, I think that most people can see that that is not the most efficient way of getting our groceries. So our butter, our cheese, our bread, obviously our milk, our cream, our yogurt, etc., etc. Now, some milk vans do deliver more than just milk, but not very many items. Far more efficient to have your groceries delivered by the online supermarket, and actually to have your milk and other liquids delivered ideally in a plastic bottle, because plastic glass bottle tends to be about 83% more energy to make than a plastic bottle, even more for the really heavy for the really heavy ones. So it's really not a great solution. And you have to remember that plastic is also recyclable. So the key, of course, is that you put it into the recycling, and it does actually get recycled. So same goes for wine bottles. Wine bottles would be much better if we had the wine in plastic. The problem with that is that they're having a little bit of problem with the technology to actually preserve the wine for any length of time in plastic bottles. So they're all right if you drink the wine within 3 months, but longer than that, it might be a problem. Although I think that they're beginning to overcome that, and you will find that there's some wine that are beginning produced in plastic bottles which have a longer life. So that's a positive development. And then the fourth one is unwrapped fruit and vegetables. Now, this is really tricky, because sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't make sense to have it wrapped in plastic and whatever, but predominantly it probably makes more sense to have it wrapped in plastic and well, basically to have it packaged. And the reason is because that it keeps the food for longer. But also, if you think about it, if you have these great big vats in store of, say, loose apples or something, firstly, you have to remember they're still going to come in something from wherever they're delivered. So they come in some sort of container. You then poke and prod the apples, pick out the ones that you like best, and the store is left with much more food waste in store. Then you take your apples home in probably a plastic bag, unless you've remembered to bring your own bag to pick up the apples. Which of course some people do, but a lot of people don't. So they then take a new bag, and then you're thinking, well, what's the point of that? Because you haven't saved any packaging, you've got extra waste in store, so you haven't really done anything anyway. Next slide. And then there are things like cucumbers. Now, you know, it does seem really ridiculous to have a lovely, I say lovely, but not really lovely, a plastic sleeve over the cucumber. But a lot of people think, oh my God, this is, you know, this is terrible. I'd much rather have the cucumber not wrapped in plastic. However, it means by putting the wrapper on, it extends the life of the cucumber from about 3 days before it becomes off to about 14 days, which means many less wasted cucumbers. And there's far more energy and resources being put into growing the cucumbers than on the plastic sleeve. So, you know, some things you just have to think of the wider issue. And if you related that to meat or fish, then it is absolutely bonkers not to go for the plastic wrapping, because that really does preserve the meat and the fish, and the impact of producing the meat and the fish is just huge compared to the packaging. So there are a few things that you might have thought were good, but are not quite so good. And now I'm going to come up with 6 things that we should be doing. Firstly, reducing waste. Yeah, next slide. Reducing waste. And because it was positive luxury, rather than producing something about supermarkets and packaging, I thought I'd just produce this example, which some of you will have seen, but I think it's really shocking. And Burberry were reported last year for incinerating, over a period of 5 years, £90 million worth of clothing and perfume stock. And I mean, that is just, to me, that is just iniquitous. It's morally wrong. Really, Burberry, perhaps a bit unfortunate, because they got a lot of publicity about it, and I think a lot of other luxury brands do it too. One of my suggestions to Positive Luxury is that they should do a survey of the luxury brands and identify what do they do with their stock, out of season stock, at the end of the year now that this has been highlighted as a really shocking, terrible thing. Burning them, incinerating them, sorry, that's the same thing, throwing them on landfill sites or whatever else, I think is awful. Apparently Nike have been doing it, you know, lots of other brands. So personally, I think this should be a really big thing if we could stop it. The second thing is, next one, to consider the life cycle impact of whatever product that you're looking at, and just to focus on the luxury brands. One of the real benefits of luxury brands is that they tend to be more durable. I mean, my father had a lovely pair of brown leather shoes that he had for about 50 years. He used to polish them assiduously, at least once a week, possibly every day, I'm not quite sure, but anyway, he used to polish them a lot. But he used the same pair of shoes. He'd just get them repaired and come back again. Now that is just unheard of. Next one. So also improving recycling systems, particularly on the go recycling for stuff. That really is a big problem nowadays, because household recycling is really not bad. So, you know, that's slightly been cracked in many ways, but on the go recycling is really a shocking thing, and lots of it is there because people put them in the wrong containers, and then the people who collect them don't think it's worth doing. And this is an issue that we really need to sort out. I put a little small thing on the right hand side of my of the slide, which is actually from a website called TerraCycle, an organization, and they have this website, and they have started recycling millions of different things. So if you go on their website, TerraCycle it's called, I really recommend it. I've discovered that my dentist takes back all our toothbrushes and toothpaste and anything that's waste from dental treatment, and they send it back to TerraCycle, who recycle it into all sorts of things. So that's really good. Next one, number 4. But what's the point of recycling things if we don't actually use recycled materials? So we tend to have a thing where we're recycling apparently lots of stuff, but we're not using the material. There's no demand for it. It's not replacing a raw material. Now this is actually my son Connor. He has a sustainable design business, so he's very into all these issues. And this sweater that he's wearing comes from something called Riley Studio. They've made it from 52% recycled cotton and 48% recycled polyester from PET bottles. And of course, it's replacing virgin materials. So instead of actually making it from raw cotton and things, they're making it from recycled stuff. That's great. Next one. So this is just trying to sort of get the sort of global concept. Is what we really want to be doing is we want to design for a circular economy. So instead of a linear economy, which is what we basically do at the moment, where we dig stuff out of the ground, we manufacture it, we sell it, use it, and then we chuck it back in the ground again, or in some way or other. But what we should be doing is actually having the resources that we have going round and round and round. I mean, Connor's sweater, when he's finished using it, lasts for a very long time. But when he's finished using it, should be made into rags. And then when the rags are things, stuffing. You know, there are all sorts of things that we could be doing so that we are using the resources to the absolute maximum. In sometimes in different applications, doesn't have to go back from bottle to bottle. It can go into other things as well. Next one. But of course, the really, really big issue is stopping plastic waste getting into our oceans. And one of the things that I did think was really good about the War on Waste programme with Hugh Fanning-Whittingstall was the fact that he's highlighting the fact that we've now had a thing, most of you will have understood this, where we're not being able to export a lot of our plastic waste to China anymore. But masses of it is going to Malaysia and other countries too. And we label it as recycled and ship it off to these countries. And then it goes there and it ends up in places like this, and it is not recycled. And this stuff is like right on the waterways. It's going into the sea. It's, you know, it is really shocking. And in fact, 70% of plastics that are getting into our oceans come from places with no waste management. So to my mind, that is number one thing that we really need to be doing. So next one. So here are some conclusions. Next one. So it's not plastics or even glass or paper that's bad. It's how we use them. We really have got to start thinking about not just what material we use, but how to stop being so wasteful. And, you know, let's go back and remember that awful example of Burberry's throwing away all their perfectly good clothes. I mean, there are millions of examples of like that. Number two, the public anger about plastics, I'm hoping, is going to be a real turning point. People are becoming more aware. People want to do something. What I want is to make sure that what people do is actually something that really makes a difference, rather than just venting their anger and doing a lot of things that really are pretty useless. Next one. We clearly need to stop our disposable culture, but that doesn't just mean replacing plastic with paper or glass or other materials. It means thinking innovatively about what we're doing, and again, you know, closed loop systems if we can. And when we're targeting manufacturers and retailers, we want to make sure that they're not just simply thinking about just their little part of the problem, but actually engaging them in the bigger issue and seeing how they can do that. I mean, if we're going to start tackling waste getting into the sea, we don't want companies just narrowly focusing on whether they're, you know, wrapping their organic carrots in plastic or not. We actually want them to do something which is helping us tackle this big issue of how we stop plastics getting in there. And of course, next one, and of course, tackling waste in developing countries has to be like really high up on our agenda. So we're not just focusing on our own situation and choosing different materials, but we're actually thinking about, well, how can we do things about that? What can we do to tackle that? Is a really good organization called Waste Aid that are doing some extremely exciting things in developing countries in terms of getting people to make, sort of, for example, building bricks from plastic bags and things like that. And we should be supporting organizations like that. So next one. So the challenge for the luxury goods industry is to maximize the benefits and qualities of longevity, and not getting too carried away with simplistic anti-plastic solutions that don't actually make environmental sense. And as I said, I think that throwing away and burning new and wearable clothing is actually immoral. So that's where I am.
Well, thank you so much for that, Julia. That was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed listening in. I think we have a few questions for you. If you don't know if you can see them in the Q&A box. While I'll just give Julia a chance to read through the questions. We have a good announcement as well. So we have been running a little competition. So 5 of you will be selected to win examples of the new Green Consumer Book, Consumer Guide. So we'll just send out an email to the winners after this webinar. And
although I have to say that the new Green Consumer Guide was published in 2007, so it's not really that new. It's very out of date. It'll give you a lot of ideas, principles or whatever, but and hopefully, you know, start you going. But it is, I haven't written another book since, and I probably won't write certainly a book of that type again, because now you get such up-to-date stuff on the internet And I do have a website, juliahales.com, if you want to have a look. And I put, you know, thoughts and perspectives about different things on my website. So maybe that's also a good place to have a look. Okay, so question number one that I've got, who asked almost immediately I started my presentation, how can I influence brands and shops to reduce their plastic use? But I hope after hearing my presentation, that isn't necessarily the top question in there. And I can see you asked that at 3:05 p.m. where I showed you that terrible video and you know, highlighted what's happening on the beach. So I think that rather than writing an answer, it's probably better to just verbalize it. And I just think, I do think you want to be making your voice heard to retailers, manufacturers about what they're doing. But it's not just to reduce their plastic use, it's to reduce their waste. That's what we need to be doing, is we need to identify wasteful practices. So for example, the White Company, here's an example. I bought a dress from the White Company. It was a black velvet dress. And when I got it, it was in a big box. Then within the box was a big plastic envelope, I think. And then within the big plastic envelope, it actually had bubble wrap for a dress. I mean, you know, certainly not fragile. And then under the bubble wrap, there was another plastic bag. And then in the plastic bag was tissue paper and lots of paper about the whole thing. And then the dress. But really, I mean, actually, at some of my presentations that I did, I just actually piled up you know, all these things, threw it all over the room, and to just illustrate how wasteful it is. So next question, Ian Wood has set in. Hi Julia, accepting that there's good and bad misuse of plastic, who do you see being responsible for deciding how oil, the base ingredient, is allocated to those industries that need to keep using plastic? I don't really see it sort of structured quite like that. I think that what we have to recognize, and I've sort of tried to build that into my speech, is that plastic is the most incredibly good material because it's lightweight and really efficient, and quite often it is the best environmental solution because it is much better for climate change. So we're very focused on the problem of plastics in the sea, which is obviously we don't want, but we have to recognize that plastic as a material is actually saving huge amounts of energy around the world. So we have to think about where it's the best energy saving is going to come from, what's the best material to use, how to make sure that the maximum amount is recycled, and that whatever can't or isn't recycled does not end up in the sea. So I think that would be my answer to that question. I've now got someone called Andrew Moose, love the name Moose. What is your view on some studies that show harmful effects of plastics leaching into the human body from food packaging? Should this impact our view on potential packaging solutions that are the most environmentally friendly? Well, I have to say that I am not very well informed about sort of toxins and all that side. I did actually set up an organisation on electrical waste, and the lady who I set it up with, Melinda Watson, she was very keen on this whole issue about plastics and contamination and how it affects the human body and that whole side of things. But I've never really sort of gone that route. I just think there's so many harmful effects of having too much waste and that side of things. I don't really know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how about the health impacts. I'm not convinced it's that bad. Because obviously we all drink lots of water out of plastic water bottles, and you know, we're living longer than we ever were, so maybe it could be worse. Okay, now I can see Emily Fass. Regarding the cucumbers wrapped in plastic, I understand that the waste of cucumbers creates a higher waste of energy, but cucumbers can be put on a compost. If animals eat them, it is okay, while the plastic the cucumber is wrapped in is harmful for animals and human mankind. What do you say to that? Well, what I say to that is I think that no, what you haven't understood is throwing away the cucumber on the compost is absolutely fine. I mean, that's lovely. Fertilize your garden or whatever, goes in the food waste bin. That's all right. So what I'm trying to explain is that growing the cucumbers, the chemicals that they put in, the water, the labor of doing it, all the various process of the chain of wrapping of the cucumber is far greater than the plastic wrapping. So if you waste that cucumber, you are wasting all the energy and resources and materials that have gone into growing the cucumber. So, that is pretty pointless. And the amount of plastic waste is minimal compared to that in terms of its climate change impact and all the other things. So it really doesn't make sense. And I think that's it. I think I've got 4 on the things. And then there's a separate button that says chat, and there seem to be 9 things on chat. Oh, here we are.
Yeah, I think that was all the questions. It's also just on the dot, so I think the time is up. But I mean, if any of you have any other questions, I think you're more than welcome to email us, and we can send them over to Julia and to see if, and then get back to you as soon as possible. Yeah, I hope that you all found it very useful. I don't think there are any more questions in the chat box, but again, please feel free to send any questions over if you think about anything afterwards.
Okay, thank you everybody as well from me. It's a bit unnerving talking at the screen. I can obviously hear Claudia, and not Claudia, it's not Claudia. But not being able to hear anybody. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you for participating in this webinar.
Thank you so much, Julia. And for the rest of you, just want to announce our next webinar, which is with that's with Argentum Apothecary, and it will be on sustainable ingredient sourcing. So very interesting, that one. And for those of you that don't know the brand, it's a luxury skincare brand. They create these products from natural origins and groundbreaking science. So very, very interesting webinar coming up. And I think it's just important to note that it's going to be very interesting for all kinds of industries, not only the beauty industry, because obviously this is something that a lot of all different industries are looking into at the moment. So definitely sign up for that one as well. But thank you so much for joining us, and see you again soon. Thank you, Julia.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks for doing my slides. Okay, off we go. How many people came, Claudia?